one thing that's really like shaped the way that we think is just the idea of experimenting, trying. I think a lot of times, like, and I said it already earlier, like you get paralyzed not knowing how to do the thing, or that it's not perfect or it's not all thought out. Just try it. It doesn't have to be perfect. Try it, learn something, turn the dial, and try it again.
This is episode number 162 of the Missional Marketing Podcast. My name is Bart Blair. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode. We've been producing this podcast for a little over 4 years with the goal of helping churches grow by leveraging digital marketing and effective communications. If you're new to the show, make sure that you subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts so that you don't miss any future episodes. And I should probably mention that this being the 162nd episode means that we have over 160 episodes in our archives that you might find to be helpful. So make sure that you take a few minutes to scroll back through your Spotify feed or your Apple Podcast feed, or even through our YouTube channel, to look at some of the previous interviews and episodes that we have created that might be helpful, very practical. That's our goal, to be very practical for you in your role in communications and marketing in your church. If you are listening to this in real time, the summer is likely over and the fall is upon us, and you're probably making your fall plans. We hope that in your fall plans is a trip to Dallas to the Church Communications Conference. That's happening on September 19th and 20th in Colleyville, Texas, which is a suburb of Dallas, at Compass Christian Church. And we'd love to see you there. It's going to be a 2-day event filled with all kinds of great content specifically designed for people who are in the church communications space. So we hope that you'll plan to be there. You can find out more by going to our website at churchcommunications.com. You'll also find, in addition to information about the Church Communications Conference, some other roadshow events, live events that we do throughout the country. We've got a few more on the calendar for 2024, and we're already making our plans for 2025. So maybe we'll be coming to a location near you. So make sure that you check that out. Well, if you happen to be a regular listener of the podcast, you're going to note that my co-host, Jason Hamrock, the CEO of Missional Marketing, is not with me on this episode again, but I did bring in a co-host. I filled Jason's seat with one of our very talented team members. His name is Zach Bernauer. Zach serves on the Church Communications Group team as a social media coach, works with churches all around the country to help them with their social media initiatives. And so I brought Zach on to be another voice on the podcast. So the voice that you hear, that's not mine, and it's not Jason, and it's not our guest. That's Zach. Zach's going to be with us for a couple of episodes while Jason is traveling. I think the time we recorded this particular episode, he was on vacation, but he's also doing all kinds of on-site visits with churches lately. So his travel schedule has been kind of crazy, and it's been hard for me to nail down podcast recording times with him. So I got the capable Zach to fill in. So shout out to Zach. Thanks for making the time with me this week to record this episode. Our interview this week is with another very talented and gifted individual named Karianne Langfield. Karianne is the Director of Communications and all things digital at one of the fastest growing churches in the country called Eaglebrook Church. They're in Minnesota, and she's going to give us the lay of the land with all things Eaglebrook. She's going to share her story as to how she got into ministry and the church communications role. And then she's going to talk a bit about how her team works to help support the mission and the values of Eaglebrook Church. It's a really fascinating conversation. They have tons and tons of moving parts, but they've got some good systems and strategies put into place to really help support the church from a communications standpoint. So I think that you're really going to enjoy this episode, this interview. I really enjoyed getting to know Karianne and look forward to having more engagement with her in the future. So thanks again for tuning in to this week's episode. Without any further delay, here's Zach Bernauer and our interview with Karianne Langfield from Eaglebrook Church. Well, Karianne, thanks so much for joining us on the Missional Marketing Podcast. How are you doing?
I'm great. How are you guys?
I'm good. Zach, you good?
Yeah, I'm doing well. It's been busy talking to churches and getting them ready. At this point for Christmas, we're heading into that Christmas season. So
Same.
yeah,
I just got a meeting invite that we're launching Christmas here in a couple weeks.
Yeah.
Okay. See, you guys have there are already people listening to this going, wait a minute, am I listening to the right episode? Because this episode is dropping in August. Yeah. And they're asking questions about Christmas. And yes, the truth is, if it's August and you haven't already started conversations with your church leadership team about Christmas, well, now is the time to start doing that. In fact, my friend Ben Stapleton, who's recently been on our show for the second time, would say, if you're not already talking about Christmas, you're already way too late. So maybe we'll talk a little bit about Christmas planning today. Maybe not.
It comes so fast.
Yeah,
Yep.
maybe not. Well, Karianne, we would love to get to know you today. Glad that you are able to be on the show with us. You are a communications director, and many of the people listening to our show are communications directors. Why don't you give us a little bit of background in your ministry, how you ended up in ministry, how you ended up at Eaglebrook?
Yeah, that's a great question. We'll try to keep it a little succinct so we don't get into like the full story of Karianne. But essentially, I mean, I grew up in the church as early as like sixth grade. I remember my mom actually prompted me to like, hey, why don't you think about leading a Bible study in your junior high? And I was like, no way, Mom. Like, that's not the cool thing to do. But I did. And actually See You at the Pole was one of the first catalytic events I really think in my faith journey that I was like, okay, well, if I can organize a See You at the Pole in sixth grade, seventh grade, maybe there's something. And so actually that started my run of actually very intentional campus ministry throughout middle school, junior high, high school. Just a really cool story, like how God showed up and people came to know Jesus. And I just started to think like, I would love to be in ministry. And I'd never thought it could look the way that I was like trajectorying in that space in my life. Graduated high school, really wanted to go into ministry and got involved with Youth for Christ. Was involved in my church. I am like northern Minnesota at this point in my life. And God was just at work, and I just continued to feel like Spirit leading me into ministry. In that, majored in communications. But everybody's path takes a little bit of a different turn here and there. It's not straight. Graduated college and moved to the Minneapolis area, which is just a couple hours south from me. Got involved in a church. Actually, that's where I first started going to Eaglebrook, got involved, started with student ministries because that's what I knew. I had been involved with student ministries for many years, just as a volunteer, though, involved with small groups. And then one day, I should back up and say, like, I was in like the operations, HR, accounting world. My dad actually was an accounting teacher in high school. And so like that kind of thing came very natural to me, though. I do vividly remember one morning waking up and I'm like, is this what the next 40 years look like? Like, and it was just like this vivid moment of like, I don't think I could do this.
What did you study in college? What did you major in?
Communications and social psychology.
Okay.
So
all right.
He wanted to be a therapist, and part of me wanted to just like travel and speak to people.
Okay.
Honestly. But here we are in HR and operations and accounting, doing some other things for a paint contractor, which I loved. It was a really great experience. But then one day I was shoulder tapped at church, and one of the leaders at the time was like, hey, we're opening our very first mobile location in a high school. We've never done this before, and we think you'd be a great fit. I'm like, no way. I've written off like ministry. Like, I just don't think that's going to be like the path for me. But between my husband and also the Holy Spirit was like, just apply. Let's just see what happens. Apply, take the first step. And then it was like, okay, just do the interview. Okay. It was just like one thing after another. And I joined our staff just over 14 years ago, coming in as a pastor of serving in small groups for our very first mobile location in high school. So that's like really my launch into Eaglebrook. And then over the course of the last 14 years, I served as the role got split, like, sometimes it does. I then took the pathway of serving, hospitality, guest experience. That way I was a pastor about 5-6 years at that location, moved us into a permanent building. And then just there's a series of just like stirring and just like learning about myself and some coaching that I was doing, just learned I actually love to be on the front end to help create and design and problem solve. And so I made a move from the campus into our central team and joined our creative arts team as a project manager. Did that for a bit, but it was a very short run before my then supervisor was like, you need to be on the communications team. And I was like, no, I'm great, just doing this. And he's like, no, we're moving you over here. And so I became a communications director. And then in COVID, we added in digital. So I'm communications and digital now. So that's a little bit of my journey into Eaglebrook and into ministry. So I've been doing this for about 14 years now.
Okay, that's cool. And we'll kind of double click a little bit later in our conversation about what that looks like between the communications and the digital side of things. Give us some framework for Eaglebrook. What does the church look like today? What are some of the things that are kind of key differentiators between Eaglebrook and maybe other churches in your community, in your area?
Yeah, well, it's a really great question. Kind of like hard to summarize. I would say Eaglebrook accidentally fell into a multi-site strategy. Back in 2005, we outgrew our current location. People just kept coming. We had 7 services over the course of the weekend. And at that time, our senior pastor, we called it ping ponging. He would be in the lower worship center and then he'd go up to the upper worship center and he would ping pong back and forth throughout the weekend, giving a message. Because it was the one way to move people up and move people down so we could get all the people in. So in 2005, we moved to, we built a building, moved into a larger facility, and within a month or so, just quickly outgrew it. And our leadership team at the time was like, I think we're multi-site. We went back and opened our previous, our first location, and it kind of just went from there. People just kept coming. And that was back in 2005. We're now 2024, we're launching 2 more campuses this fall, which will bring us up to 14 locations. And then we've got an online attender base as well with a growing thing we call viewing groups, where we have pockets of groups of people throughout the country who are hosting essentially like an in-home church experience where they're streaming our content, but they've got a community of people that are watching church with them.
Okay. These 14 locations, what's kind of the geographic span of the 14 locations?
We are in Minnesota primarily, but spreading out into the Midwest.
Okay. And when you say Midwest, what does that mean? That means I'm learning that Midwest means different things to different people. It depends on where you live.
That's great. Midwest to us is looking like Minnesota, Wisconsin, up into the Dakotas. So we've got some plans for future location up in Fargo. We're just kind of around this 5-state region, essentially.
Okay. Zach, is that how you would have defined the Midwest?
I would have guessed Missouri, Indiana, Illinois.
A little bit south.
Okay, a little bit south, but that's just my thought.
Okay.
How far is your home pods reaching? At what states are they serving in?
Oh, we are Arizona, Washington, Florida. There's a lot of snowbirds. Minnesota's very cold in the winter, so we've got a lot of people who move to the south. But really all over the country. We've got this viewing group map that just populates. I think we're up to 40 groups. We have one in Wisconsin that's actually a bar. People are meeting in a bar. So it's kind of all over the country, but those are our pockets. It's really down south where it's a little bit warmer than Minnesota.
Yeah. Wisconsin gets pretty cold in the winter too. So I guess meeting at a bar is one way to keep warm in the winter.
It's such a cool transformation story of the owner who just was just transformed. Jesus just changed his life and he's just you know what? I don't want to own this bar anymore. I actually want to be a pastor. So he's taken his bar and moved it into a church essentially. And so now they are Forgiven Church and they stream Eaglebrook messages.
Oh, that's very cool.
Pretty incredible.
So obviously, man, I can only imagine with a dozen or more locations that as far as communications is concerned, you're spinning a lot of plates. There are a lot of different things going on. Describe your team for us. What does your communications team, your communications department look like? And how are you supporting central services versus campus locations? What does that look like on a weekly basis for you?
I wish we had a formula to just share with the world of how we can be global and local at the same time, centralized, decentralized. But what it looks like for us today is, it may be surprising to some people because a church our size, a lot of comparison to other location or churches essentially have much larger teams. So we have one person who sits in these. One person per seat. So we've got a copywriter, social media strategist, a marketing strategist, got a project manager, and I've got 2 people sitting in the digital space. So they oversee web, app, and texting and any other like tool that we're using. So it's a team of 7 or so, leading 14 locations essentially. So I would say like a large split of our team, our time really is just like spent focusing on the weekend. I'd say that we've tried to like create a process in a way that helps support the like campus so that they can do what they do best. And we've hired them to do ministry, be our pastors, connect, create great weekend experiences. And we just create the tools that they can just employ essentially. And so that's a little bit of how our team is structured. How we get it done, Jesus. I honestly, I look at the stuff that this team does and the incredible brilliance behind like their work, and I don't know how we do it. We don't actually, which is maybe unique to us, we don't actually have a team of like volunteers. Our creative arts team, they don't have volunteers. We just haven't gone that route yet. Really just, I think we get paralyzed a little bit in like how to do it. So we try to find ways to scale what we are doing and then find ways to support the campus in projects or initiatives that they're doing and give them the tools that they can like make what they have come to life.
So are all of your campuses, are they video broadcast locations?
Yes, all locations are video broadcasts.
Okay, so everything is kind of synced to one particular schedule. How do you manage, and then I'll let Zach kind of dig into this because the social media space is really more his forte, but how do you manage social media channels and how do you manage requests for content coming in from all the different campuses and the locations? From a technical standpoint, there's 2 different things. I know that there are people listening to our podcast who are asking these questions. So I'll go ahead and ask them, and then I'll let Zach dig into that a little more deeply with you because he lives in that space a little more than I do.
Yeah. Well, we have a couple, we're not in all of the social media spaces. Like we're not on TikTok. Like we just have to like make some choices based off capacity and resourcing. So we just can't do all the things. Also knowing that every channel requires different kind of content. So knowing we have some limitations, but we're going to do our best in Instagram, YouTube. We're growing in YouTube, and then also in Facebook. So when it comes to like social media, we really view our main platform to be the marketing side of Eaglebrook. We know that every weekend is someone's first weekend, but long before they step foot inside one of our locations, they're checking us out online. Mm-hmm. So we want our social spaces, and I mean, getting into web and digital too, but getting our social spaces like a first glimpse of what an experience at Eaglebrook looks like. And then we actually each campus has a Facebook group. So back when, during the pandemic, we made a shift from pages to groups, really because we wanted the groups to be a place for ministry to happen. And so we felt like things like brand integrity and experience, and when it comes to content and design, we can have a little bit more leeway in the group than we would like representing how Eaglebrook looks on the front page of our main stuff. And so we tried to like separate a little bit to give more permission to the campus, more autonomy, more opportunity for them to just do ministry and have more space to like engage in conversation and prayer requests and takeaways from the weekend. And you'll find a different kind of experience on our main, even though there's a lot of integration. We want to just drop value and nuggets and goodness into people's like lives throughout the week. But that's a little bit how we've separated, I would say, like our main stuff from our campus. And so our campus, we provide tools and like photos and graphics and things that they're going to want to use that they can pull from. And then they essentially just have a loose schedule that they work off of. So they're promoting baptism sometime during the next 10 days, or they're promoting groups sometime in the next week. And so we are providing all the assets that they need, but also not creating one-off. We just don't create one-off content for campuses. We share all the things.
Yeah, I think that's really even smart to knowing your team, is that you mentioned at the beginning that you're not on all of the platforms, because that is such a pressure. And I think even the larger of your church, that becomes even more of a pressure, is that we need to be on everything. But that comes from a place of understanding your team and understanding their capacity and even their expertise, because a lot of times with the platforms, just because you can doesn't mean you should. Mm-hmm. For churches, a lot of times TikTok is one of those spaces right now. Yep. So leaning into that expertise and even your capacity, like mentioning that you're not volunteer based, like it's your team and
Mhm.
you guys only have 40 hours a week and
Right.
24 hours in a day, and your time is limited. So leaning in to what you guys can do well, that's like
Mhm.
really important, and that ultimately brings that brand integrity, and to create groups where that can have fluidity in ministry is a really brilliant model that a lot of churches should look to adopt into.
Mhm. It's really hard though. I mean, like our mission is to reach people for Christ and we are laser focused about it. Like everything we do is about reaching people for Christ. And I think that's like what's really hard in this context though is um we want to reach cradle to grave. We want to reach people on all the platforms. And so um but we it's like the thing about like diversifying your platforms and diversifying your content, like, and then being excellent where you can be and quality where it matters. But it is really hard to make the decision that kind of goes against the grain when you're looking at a church our size, even to be like, well, why aren't you here? I've listened to podcasts and conferences where people are like, every church has to be here in this spot. And if you're not, you're missing it. And it's like, I get it, but also like we can't do all the things. And at this point, like let's do these few things really well and be great about that and further our reach in these spaces.
Mhm.
And then let's maybe think about adding something. But that's even why like our kids team doesn't have Instagram. They're still on Facebook. And a lot of that vision around like, but Instagram requires different content than what Facebook does. And they're just not equipped to like maintain that content creation and like the pacing of it. And so it's really hard to say no when you actually like really believe in your mission to reach people for Jesus and that people are everywhere, but we're not showing up everywhere. It's hard to draw that line and decide where you're going to put it all.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because working at a church and communicating a church, like church communications, is very different than any other industry. When you have another company or industry, you're very focused on a targeted market and a targeted audience. Where when it comes to Christianity and our faith and our spirituality, we want everyone to
Mhm.
that and all of that exposure. Um, but sometimes we can't do that just in one specific way, whether it's a social media platform. So it is that the wisdom is, I know where I can invest, I know where I have resources and time.
Mhm.
And that's where I'm going to sit in right now. And as God enlarges my territory, God sends the people in our church, then we can have those conversations of what other spaces can we occupy. But it is very wise going right now. This is where we're doing what's best. And we're just going to trust God. We're just going to
Yeah,
trust God to spread the message and to bring people in that then can serve his kingdom even further.
absolutely. Absolutely. That's great.
Listeners of our podcast will have heard me say this many times, but I think most churches overestimate what they can accomplish on social media. That the
Mhm.
juice is not always worth the squeeze. So the more tentacles you have going out there to the different channels and the different platforms and the different types of content that you're trying to create, it just takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of
Mhm.
energy to maintain it, to create it, to keep the pace. So setting realistic expectations for what you can do and what you hope to gain from it, I think is always really important. Let's shift the conversation a little bit from the social media space to just
Sure.
other communications tools that you're using in the church. In missional marketing, we break our audience down into kind of three. We call them our three rings of communication. Ring one, center circle, would be your Eaglebrook family, people who are connected to your church. Second ring is people who are in your geographic community actively looking for a church. And then ring three is everybody else in your geo-targeted area who's not actively looking for a church, but could benefit from some ministry that you
Mhm.
offer. They're trying to DIY some problem on the internet.
Right.
Let's talk a little bit about your ring one as it relates to communications, because again, you're a big church, a lot of locations, a lot of campuses. Probably most of the time, everybody's kind of tracking in the right direction, but you've got a lot of bases to cover to make sure that people know what they're supposed to know when they're supposed to know it. What are the primary ways that you are communicating with your ring one audience? And I want you to expand on this in two ways. One, with the rest of the staff and the ministry leaders in the church, how do they get to you what they want communicated? And then 2, how are you prioritizing what gets communicated? And then 3, how are you actually communicating those things? So are you writing that down? Because I just asked you a really big question.
I started to write it down. I'm like, okay, I have 3 questions.
Sorry, it was 3 questions. Yeah, you get the big picture of what I'm trying to get at here is how do you decide what gets communicated and what channels are you using it, especially as it relates to, every church has this tension that the children's ministry director or the family ministry director or the marriage ministry director, their ministry is the most important ministry in the church to them. And so they're going to want to champion the things that they need to communicate. How do you as a team decide, number one, how do you receive those requests? How do you decide what gets communicated? And then what are the methods and the systems that you use to make sure that people know what they're supposed to know?
Yeah, it's such an integrated process, isn't it? Everything we do is really around the weekend. If we didn't have the weekend, then I think Eaglebrook would look very different. What's also unique about Eaglebrook is we're not an events-based church. So back in the day with the concept of simple church, we've taken on that idea, that concept to apply it into our space. So contrary to a lot of opinion and probably a lot of what other churches are doing, we don't actually have a women's ministry or a men's ministry. We don't do VBS. We don't have summer camp. We do a few things really well. And so one of the things we do really well is the weekend. Kids happens on the weekend. We don't have kids programming throughout the week. And then we have students that do happen on Wednesday. So those 3 things, which is the weekend, kids that happen on the weekend, and then students that happen during the week, those are our focus. And so we pour all of our energy into helping people know what's happening on the weekend, what we're talking about, not even who we're talking about, who's speaking rather, but what the topic, and how they can experience us, whether that's in person or online. Also kids, and then again with students. So what's unique that really unifies our staff and our team is that we're so laser focused on reaching people for Jesus. And if the thing that we're doing isn't going to reach people, we're not going to do it. And so it's actually very streamlining in our event process. So for example, we had baptism last weekend. I guess it's maybe 10 days ago, a week and a half ago. And that we know as a church, that is the focus. We're not competing with VBS and we're not competing with other events and things that are happening at our church. And so there's beauty in being laser focused about your mission, being laser focused as a team and as a staff, so that I'm not getting a request that says hey, we have this potluck on Friday night, because that's not the kind of church that we are. We just don't sit in that strategy. Now, if one of our campuses says, hey, Karianne, we want to, because we are a Saturday, Sunday church, so we want to strengthen our attender base on Saturdays. And here's how we're going to do it. We're going to do Saturday night events in between services or after service outside. Cool. We'll include that content into your campus e-note. And beyond that, you've got Facebook, you've got weekend space when you get up and give your announcements and share some vision around Eaglebrook and the campus, and your volunteer huddles and volunteer spaces. So we've created very unique channels for campuses to share what's happening specific to their location. But other than that, when it's a global event, the global event takes over all the communication. We're I'd say very clear and strategic with saying hey, this is what you're majoring in. This is what you're minoring in. And if it's not within that space, then there's not this isn't the right time for that messaging. And so I'd say we don't get a ton of requests, contrary to what some other churches might experience, just because we're so laser focused in our approach and how we do church.
What tools are you using primarily for communication? Email, text messaging, an app, website? How do you prioritize those things?
Yeah, we use an app, we use email, we do text messaging, but again, we don't text message the way everybody else text messages. We don't have ongoing conversation with people. Right now, text messaging serves as a vehicle to get information out to people. So you want to be involved in a small group, text groups to our number, and we'll send you a link. Now, I don't know if it's the best way to utilize texting for us, but it's where we're at right now. And it's working for people to just get people in the door, to create a low bar of entry so more people can just access the information to be able to take their next step in faith. So texting looks different for us. Our app also looks different. We consider our app to be a place that once you've sort of decided Eaglebrook Church is home for you, then we ask you to download the app. And in the app, it's really just a place for you to grow, but also not a place for you to like sign up to do things or find out what's next. It's like, how do I spend time with God? Here's some like great tools, studies, plans. So our app, looks a little bit different. It's not a replica of our website.
Okay, I'm going to shift one more time. We have a few minutes left, and here's something that you've hit on repeatedly is that you have this laser focused effort to reach people who are far from God, to reach the unchurched, the dechurched, the lost people in your community. How are you utilizing marketing, your messaging? What are you doing as a church to get the attention of the unchurched people in your community?
Well, I would say the climate in Minnesota is just very open, like very open to church, open to trying it out, open to the invitation. So we really do leverage invitation quite a bit at Eaglebrook. I'd say the majority of people who come to Eaglebrook have come by way of word of mouth because somebody has been like, hey, I had this experience at church. Unlike an experience I had growing up or previously, Minnesota's predominantly like Catholic Lutheran communities. So Eaglebrook is a very different fall Baptist, but feel very non-denominational. So people who are checking us out are like, oh, that's different. That's not how church I remember it to be. So some of the things that we really value is relatability, accessibility, conversational, that we can laugh. That's one of my favorite things about Eaglebrook is that I'm sitting in a service and I'm laughing. I just think as a people in a culture and society, like there's so much heavy. And I love that we can just lighten the load a little bit and just laugh together. So humor done in the right way, it just really lifts the load. And people are like, oh, I don't have to come in knowing. So a little bit of our framework of Eaglebrook is to just be very relatable, engaging, accessible, conversational, so that people don't feel like they have to come knowing church to engage with us. And I would say that transfers quite a bit into like our marketing. So we want to one of our marketing pieces right now, because it's summertime and we don't get a long summer here in Minnesota, but it says, your cabin looks amazing. Take us with you. And it says Eaglebrook online. And it's really like as people are moving like up into cabin country, they catch us on the highway, like, oh, your cabin looks amazing. Like we want to go too, but you could take us with you because we have an online experience. So you don't actually miss a weekend. So we try to take like these values of like who Eaglebrook is and transfer it directly into our marketing. So whether you see that through a digital ad or you see it on our social spaces, that's just organic, through email communication, through our text messages, we just try to be like one-on-one conversation, but really knowing that we're not one-on-one, we're having conversations with the masses. But hopefully you feel like you're the only one. Like, hey, I want to go to your cabin too. Like, that's pretty cool. Or another one is like, yeah, you can wear your flip-flops. Like, it's just trying to be light. There's just so much heavy and weight. We want to just meet people where they're at and that you don't have to come any differently. Just come from the lake, show up at church, and we're just glad you're here.
Yeah. And that shows very good cultural awareness because, I mean, Minnesota is known for its people being very open and welcoming. So that shows a good community awareness and cultural awareness and leaning into that. So smart branding in addition to
Thank you. I got a great team who spend lots of hours just like, what's like the clever thing we can say that is also meaningful, thoughtful? I'm like, it's like at some point, whether, Bart, you alluded, to like, when do people like dial in like with Eaglebrook, if there's like something they're navigating that's really tough, and does Eaglebrook come to mind? And that's kind of what we just want to be. We know that sometimes marketing isn't just like a quick run, but it's a little bit of a long play that, when there is a catalytic moment that's happening in somebody's life, whether it's like grief or loss or difficulty, or maybe they're celebrating like birth of a child. They're like, hey, these are all moments we believe that people start to like engage with the church. We just want to be top of mind when they hit that moment in life. Just be like, oh, actually, like I heard about Eaglebrook, or I saw that thing, or they intersected with my life in some way. We just want to be ready and be available when they are and when they're ready to experience Jesus. And then once they come, to experience us. We want to keep as many low bars as possible, so it's distraction free, and they actually just get to like meet Jesus in his face when they're ready. So that's a little bit of just like the integrated experience, just kind of all funnels together and builds on each other.
I'm gonna ask you a question. It wasn't for full disclosure, I always send our guests some basic starter questions for our conversation. And those who listen to the podcast with Jason Hamrock know that he never sticks to the script. I'm going to go off script. I'm going to pull a Hamrock here. And hopefully I'm not putting you on the spot.
Sure.
Thinking back through all the years that you've been doing the communications and the marketing, do you have a favorite marketing moment? One of those things that you did as a church that you look back on and go, oh, we hit a gold mine on that particular initiative, that plan, that strategy. Anything stick out to you?
Oh, there's got to be. Give me a second here to just like go through my file system.
We'll press pause and we'll play the Jeopardy theme while you think about it. I did put you on the spot. Sorry.
You did. Okay, I've got one. Okay. I got an idea. So, I believe it was fall of 2021, because I believe people were still online, starting to come back. We were just kind of in this in-between space coming out of the pandemic. And again, I know I've said this a lot in this conversation about just like the heaviness of the world, but that is just kind of where we're at right now. Just a lot of heavy. In 2021 in the fall, lots of heavy. We came out with a series called How Happiness Happens. And so one of the ideas we had as a team was let's deliver happy bags, happy bags to people. And so what we included in them were like, kites, bubbles. I think there was kind of like a coffee, there was a coffee bag and then essentially like a family bag. And so we essentially, I don't even remember what the count was, but we had all these bags stuffed and ready to go. We delivered them to our campus teams, which was, I don't know how many campuses we had at that time, but a way to engage our campus and not just like our central team. But we said like, hey, you get X amount of bags, just go deliver them to people and say like, I see you. You maybe haven't returned, but we're glad you're still engaged with us, and just show up at people's doorsteps and ring the doorbell, leave the bag, ring the doorbell, have a conversation. And we just dropped happy bags to people. But then the rest of the campaign, essentially leading up into like our fall kickoff in September, was that each week we were going to have a little like nugget of a giveaway. People love Chick-fil-A cookies. We gave away Chick-fil-A cookies one week. One week we had these t-shirts that were very colorful, which I'd say is probably not like our favorite tone, but it was a very colorful like t-shirts, and people just got free t-shirts. So what are we, 3 years past that? I am still seeing t-shirts. After like baptism, my neighbors have them, like all the things. People are still wearing these t-shirts. And what it really did is I actually feel like the branding was so light and fun and playful that it just elicited this like joy. I mean, I am getting excited just like revisiting this campaign that we did of like empowering our campuses to deliver happy bags to people who maybe weren't even part of the church, but just said like, hey, you're a neighbor. And we know you've got kids and you maybe put up with us when we like do loud things outside, but in all the traffic that comes around our locations. But hey, we see you. Just like, thanks for being you. And anyway, I was revisiting that actually with a campus yesterday when they're like, hey, we'd love to reach our neighborhood. Do you have any ideas? And well, remember when we did these happy bags? And she's like, no, I wasn't on staff. And I'm like, let me tell you about the amount of happy that we dropped in people's doorsteps throughout the day. And I think in that season, it was just like churches were just trying to figure out what the next season of church looked like, and just to do something that felt different. We like to call it, right? Is it like the purple cow? Have you guys?
Yeah. Seth Godin's book, Purple Cow.
Yes, yeah. Just wanted a purple cow, a moment, and just market for people. And people, again, I think are still connected to that. And it's fun to say like, oh, you were here in 2021 because you're still wearing the t-shirt, So with a lot of growth at a church like ours, it's like fun to see people who have some longevity. So the t-shirts are like a fun nod to it.
That's very cool. I like the happy bag idea. That's pretty neat. Hey, what are the odds that you could find a photo of a happy bag and send me a photo? Any chance?
I will absolutely find you.
All right. We'll include that in the show here. So if you're watching on our YouTube channel, hopefully we had a picture, and I got Randall to throw that into to the screen here when we're talking about the Happy Bags. That's a pretty cool idea. Hey, we need to land the plane. This has been a great conversation, Karianne. We really appreciate you taking the time to just share what's going on in your ministry and in your church. Just a couple of parting questions here. Who do you look to and listen to, read to improve in your own marketing, communications, and ministry skills? Do you have any places that you go or people that you lean into to learn from?
Well, there's a couple. I mean, when I think about marketing specific, Jeff Henderson's book, Know Who You're For, has really changed just like the strategy of marketing with Eaglebrook, and really just how we message across all of our platforms, email, website, social for sure. But I would say like the broader, like more like continuous piece is like, we've got some great friends at Glue. You guys know the people at Glue. Yeah. They have done so much to just like help support, encourage, and just help us like think a little bit more innovatively. And one thing that's really like shaped the way that we think is just the idea of experimenting, trying. I think a lot of times, like, and I said it already earlier, like you get paralyzed not knowing how to do the thing, or that it's not perfect or it's not all thought out. What our friends at Glue have just encouraged us over the years is like, just try it. It doesn't have to be perfect. Try it, learn something, turn the dial, and try it again. So I'd say like Glue, Jeff Henderson's got a great book, and, you know, it's like comms forums, these kinds of conversations that just keep me like learning. But I always look to the marketplace because, you know, the marketplace is like really inspiring. Mm-hmm. And it's fun to be able to take something that's trending over there or just sparking some curiosity and see how you can apply it into a church context.
Yeah. That's very cool. Well, Karianne, thanks again for joining us. Zach, thanks for being my co-host today. Zach, do you have any parting words for our audience or for Karianne before we shut this down?
No, I love the conversation, Karianne. Thanks for letting me join along.
Thanks for letting me join along. This was such a treat for me today. So thanks for the work that you guys are doing. You guys are making a real difference, supporting churches and leaders and helping us think about comms in a new, fresh way. So thank you for your investment in us.
We absolutely love what we get to do. And we love doing this podcast and getting to meet people like you. For those of you who have actually made it all the way to the end of this episode, congratulations. It's been a great conversation, and I'd be surprised if you didn't make it all the way to the end. We're going to link to the Eaglebrook website. You can go and follow them on all the socials. And I'm sure that if you want to connect with Karianne, you can do that through the church website, through LinkedIn. I'm sure that she'd be happy to connect with you there. If you have any follow-up questions, please make sure that you subscribe wherever you're listening to your favorite podcast episodes. If you haven't done that, we've been a little sporadic with the release of our episodes. We aim for one every Friday, but the summer months have been kind of tough. So we've been a little less consistent the last few weeks or so. So if you're subscribed, you don't miss anything, and we don't want you to miss anything. We've got some great guests coming up here in the next few weeks. So thanks again for tuning in to the Missional Marketing Podcast. Thanks, Zach, for being my co-host, and Karianne, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.